Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this very special segment today on the 16th day of November 2022. Well, 26 degrees and mostly sunny here in Brisbane. It's looking like a beautiful day out there, though it's a little bit cloudy right at this point in time, but that's not going to be the case throughout the day. Well, right now, let's move on with the news for today, and we have the Daily India Report coming up right after the news update. Well, we know that Anthony Albanese is at the G20 and he's meeting Xi Jinping. A very, very historic meeting. What would we discuss? What's on the table?
30 minutes though, and President Xi is someone who almost every leader at this meeting is trying to get a meeting with, and there's 20 influential leaders here at the moment, such as Emmanuel Macron and Rishi Sunak. So 30 minutes, significant. The fact of the meeting itself, I think, is something of a diplomatic coup for Australia, and it appears to have gone very well, judging by some of what Mr Albanese said afterwards.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that a little bit, John. He did make some comments. He also tweeted that Australia will cooperate where we can, disagree where we must, and engage in our national interests. So what is that going to mean for the relationship going forward?
Yes, Beverly. Well, clearly Mr Albanese thought he needed to bring up certain issues, which of course would not have been popular with the Chinese leader, such as the treatment of the Uyghur people. He also brought up the case of the Chinese-Australian journalist Cheng Lei and Dr Yun, the academic. And he did say in that statement, as you say, that there'll be some things that where we will need to disagree. But he said there were also quite some areas, such as he said President Xi described the two economies as highly complementary. And in fact, President Xi said that he'd been to every state of Australia at least once and had warm memories of that. And in his opening comments, he made a comment about how Mr Albanese appeared to have a very honest and good approach to this, which seemed to be a bit of a slap at the previous coalition government. And they did talk about Taiwan, where Mr Albanese restated Australia's position, which was to support the status quo. Climate change came up as well. So it was a fairly broad-ranging discussion.
Yeah, so it doesn't look like any topic was off limits, but of course several industries have been targeted by China to some economic cost for the country. Do you think this is the moment it could change going forward?
Well, I think that if President Xi has a positive view of this meeting, as it appears is the case, then of course that's the next logical extension of this. Mr Albanese will want to deliver something for his own constituency back in Australia. He will want to get that $20 billion or significant parts of it, which are punitive economic sanctions that China has imposed on our barley and wine and various other products. He will want to get that lifted. So the dollar will, in the end, be the issue where Mr Albanese will say, you need to give me something. You need to give our exporters some relief from your sanctions.
Yeah. You know, John, as you pointed out, Xi is meeting with a number of leaders at the G20. Do you think China wanted to take this opportunity to break the impasse between the two nations?
I think so, Beverly. I think what's happened is President Xi has recently, as you know, as you've covered on your program many times, has got his third term, has clinched a third term from the party heavyweights in the Communist Party in China. And having done that, I think a lot of his rhetoric until then was playing to that local domestic audience to try to get that third term, the very hard rhetoric on Taiwan and other issues in Hong Kong. Having secured that, he appears to have come here to Bali wanting to rebuild some bridges. Certainly with the United States, 3.5 hours yesterday with President Biden was a significant meeting. And then at half an hour today with Anthony Albanese, there were serious questions about whether today's meeting would go ahead. That would have been something of an embarrassment to the new Australian Prime Minister. So I think President Xi has certainly said, here is an olive branch, let's see where we go from here.
That he is an olive branch. Let's see where we can go from here. Well, time will tell, but I think it's always best when people meet and talk. as our Prime Minister said, that there will be things that we'll agree on, there will be things where we will not agree on, that we really have to put our foot down, and of course have our stance in the national interest. But anyway, sitting down and having a good old yarn is the best way forward. Well, right now, what's happening to the world population? 8 billion plus, and we are moving and counting. So never before have we reached this figure.
What we can see is really a multi-track world, in the sense that some parts of the world, particularly in East Asia and also in Southeast Asia, are seeing quite very low fertility rates, record low fertility rates, very, very rapid population aging and moving into population decline. And even in places where you wouldn't necessarily think that would be the case, like in Thailand or Vietnam, even some states in India have got lower fertility rates than in Japan. Whereas then we go to other parts of the world, and of course we're seeing extremely rapid population growth, very, very high fertility rates in those parts of the world, and then some other places where are kind of in between, and we're not really sure which direction they're going to go into. So we're really dealing with a multi-pillar world at the moment. Yeah.
If we look at India, that is the standout. It's going to shift to become the most populous nation. What's critical that it gets right in terms of that population growth?
So I think the most important thing is about, in India for me, is about balance. Because, of course, India is a very, very heterogeneous country, perhaps much more so than China, for example, the other big, the other population billionaire. And population growth in India is extremely uneven between different states. Obviously, tackling inequality is going to be an issue. And one of the big kind of hot topics at the moment is, of course, the different fertility rates, or the perception of different fertility rates between different religious groups. Now, actually, those gaps are not as big as many people like to express, and many people like to say, but they are being weaponized, I think, as a political tool. So it's very important that kind of narrative around different fertility rates in India is toned down. But then finally, of course, what India has to do is realize that it's not just about the population size, not about the structure. It will be about infrastructure, about governance. It will be around productivity. It will be around maximizing the education that that people have, bringing up gender equality. This will be how India will maximize its arguably slightly more favourable demographic situation.
Yeah, and on many of those points that you raised, India does kind of lag behind, particularly gender equality. China, of course, its population has peaked. Some believe it's even over-reporting the size of its population at the moment. Has it put in place the policies that are dealing with the fact that women don't want to have the multiple children now that they've relaxed the one-child policy?
So there's been a lot of effort in the last year or so to develop more elaborate family policy systems to support women in their aspirations to have more children, whether it's in terms of childcare and kindergarten, maternity leave, tax rebates and things like that. Whether or not that works remains to be seen in terms of increasing fertility rates, because, of course, there's still a lot of reasons beyond that why the fertility rates are so low. On the other hand, they're also doing, China is putting in a lot of policy to deal with the consequences of population aging, in terms of reforming the pension system, in terms of changing the retirement age, of reducing poverty, improving healthy aging. So there's a lot of things going on at the moment, and I think that they're relatively well placed to be able to tackle some of these main issues.
Yeah, because so many people, of course, link a reduction, well, an increase in wealth, for example, and then greater urbanisation with a drop in population. But part of that too is a greater carbon footprint, which is something the planet we still haven't come to grips with.
That's right. So there is that kind of trade-off that you have, that you can say that in places in the world where fertility rates are very high at the moment, one of the quickest, one of the most effective ways of bringing those fertility rates down, as you say, is through what we see historically would be through industrialization and urbanization. But if it's done in the same way that we have industrialized and urbanized in the past, this is not necessarily going to, this will be a zero net sum game, right? Because, as you say, the carbon footprint will increase. So therefore, what we need to do is change our paradigm, is to say, well, yes, we can have clean energy, we can have clean growth, we can urbanize better. It's not just slum growth and inefficient cities and the relocation of the rural poor to cities. We actually have a new chapter, I suppose, in terms of how people are living their lives.
Yeah. Well, you know, we've hit that milestone. The population, global population will continue to grow, but then there's diminishing babies being born. Does it have to be a problem? I guess we've relied so much on population growth for economic growth.
So it doesn't need to be a problem, and in fact, many economists have actually argued. Well, actually, some economists, many economists argue that it is a problem, but some economists have said that actually fertility rates which are below what we call the replacement rate, relatively slow rates of population growth can actually be quite good if we look at GDP per capita, so economic growth as it pertains to individual well-being, rather than just a kind of abstract notion of the growth of the economy, which we don't really necessarily feel in a day-to-day way. But in order for that to happen, productivity needs to increase. People have to have that. We need to have better jobs. The economy has got to be growing in order to offset that population stagnation or decline.
Really interesting stuff, Stuart. Great to talk. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
And it is really, really interesting. And when we look at the question about that we rely on the population growth for economic growth, I don't quite agree with that term, because population growth is natural. If you look at the species that was on this earth, apart from, of course, with human beings, many species have diminished. If the ones who had not managed to sustain their population, for the better word, so they have diminished and they're not there, and there are endangered species, all by the lack of reproducing, so for whatever reason it might be, it could be all the things that have been going on around, how forests have been, or deforestation and things like that would have contributed, but the ability of a species to continue to have their presence in this world, in this environment, is dependent on reproduction. It's as very simple as that. Well, right now, let's go to this another case where COVID cases have been, and one of the world leaders has tested positive to COVID. That's a breaking news that's coming through as well.
The change that has been made this afternoon is that there is a new bivalent vaccine that is available as a third or fourth dose for Australians between the ages of 18 and 30 around the country. That'll come online from around December 12th. There are about 4.7 million doses that are in the pipeline to be delivered and distributed out around the country as we speak. Now, the Health Minister, Mark Butler, announced this afternoon. It's the second bivalent vaccine that we've seen arrive in Australia, and essentially it's used to tackle the specific Omicron strain, but it does also have effectiveness and efficacy against the original strain of COVID. People may remember we had a bivalent vaccine for the spike called Spikevax that was made made available last year. This comes amid a surging wave of COVID-19. We have heard today that cases that are being reported have been, we've seen an increase of around 47%. The hospitalisations have increased by around 11%. And the Chief Medical Officer, Paul Kelly, believes that we're in about the middle of this current wave of COVID-19. Let's take a listen to the Health Minister, Mark Butler, and hear what he had to say on it.
The advice that they've provided generally in relation to this current increase in cases, as the CMO I'm sure will point out, this increase in cases is a complicated one. It's not being driven by any particular subvariant of the Omicron strain of the virus. It's being something of a soup of variants, BA4 and BA5 still present in the country, but other cousins of Omicron subvariants, XBB and BQ1 also now present in Australia, variants that we've seen elsewhere around the world.
That was the Health Minister, Mark Butler, there talking about why we are seeing more cases of COVID-19 currently being reported around the country. Also during today's press conference, the Chief Medical Officer, Paul Kelly, made note of the use of antiviral treatments. He says that despite the fact that cases are up 47% around the country, antiviral use is up around 43%. And there have been some changes made to allow doctors and nurse practitioners to carry antiviral treatments with them so that they can be distributed to people when they need them more quickly. But as the Chief Medical Officer said, he expects that this COVID wave will be short and sharp and that we're in about the midpoint of it now.
Of course, that would be the way to go. Well, ladies and gentlemen, right now it's time to go to our daily India report.
Diplomacy
and well, apologies for that file. It does not seem to be operating as it should. We'll give it one more go, otherwise we'll have to give it a go. So unfortunately, we'll have to give it a miss today. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's been wonderful having your company. Don't forget that at 10 a.m. We have the real estate update with Usha Chandra, and we'll bring you back the Daily India report tomorrow. Until then, it's goodbye from us.